The United States is now charging commercial ships a 20% toll to pass through a strait it is simultaneously bombing 3 nights in a row. I am Lambert Woollingham, and this is the Daily Shear for Tuesday, July 16th. My fleece is holding up fine, thank you for not asking, which is more than I can say for the ceasefire, the ordnance disclosures, or several of the internet cables in Georgetown. Closer to home, Austin's infrastructure keeps finding new ways to cost more without doing anything differently, starting with the bus. Capital Metro wants to raise the price of a ride on Austin's public transit network for the first time since 2015, moving the base fare from $1.25 to $1.50 in January of 2027, then up again to $2 by 2029. Reduced fare riders get their own proportional bump, so the increase is at least being applied evenly. The agency says the extra revenue is required to absorb escalating maintenance costs and fund scheduled service expansions already on the books. Commuters get the whole summer to weigh in through public hearings initiated by administrators, a process that in the history of transit agencies has approximately never reversed a fare hike once the administrative rollout begins. Consider the comment period a formality with a very generous deadline. Austin has also passed a new municipal ordinance forcing local landlords and property management companies to explicitly list every mandatory fee up front, alongside the advertised monthly rent, before a lease gets signed rather than after. That covers trash collection premiums, utility access charges, and the other administrative add-ons that used to surface only once the paperwork was already in motion. The rule outlaws the specific trick of quoting a low number and letting the real cost arrive later in the fine print, which means it took until 2026 to require the math be shown up front. Property owners who obscure these mandatory fees during the application process now face municipal code violations and monetary penalties. A coalition of Democratic state lawmakers is demanding that the Texas Rangers open an independent investigation into the fatal shooting of Lorenzo Salgado Araujo, an unarmed man killed on July 7th when an immigration and customs enforcement agent fired through the open passenger window of a vehicle in Houston. Federal authorities have since acknowledged the operation targeted the wrong individual. Witness accounts relayed by local attorneys and congressional representatives reportedly contradict the official narrative Immigration and Customs Enforcement has given, prompting the demands for state-level intervention. Hundreds of Austin residents gathered at Wildflower Church over the weekend for a vigil, calling for the agents involved to face prosecution. The Rangers have not yet said whether they will take the case. Austin-based defense contractor Saronic just saw its autonomous naval vessels used in actual combat for the first time, shifting the company from a speculative procurement venture to an active supplier of frontline military technology. The uncrewed surface drones were deployed in recent international maritime engagements, handing the Pentagon its first real operational data on how the autonomous watercraft perform outside a controlled testing environment. For Saronic, the successful combat debut serves as concrete validation of its rapid prototyping model, helping it capture a larger share of the Defense Department's budget for robotic fleets. The company built its name on rapid prototyping, and it now has combat footage to back it up. Central Texas, it turns out, exports war robots about as reliably as it exports software. Approximately 20,000 residents and businesses in Georgetown lost broadband access on Monday after suspected copper thieves inadvertently severed critical fiber optic trunks, apparently mistaking the glass data lines for highly salvageable copper wire. Optimum, the telecommunications provider, dispatched repair crews though the widespread outage forced multiple commercial storefronts to rely on cellular hotspots just to process a sale. The thieves walked away with nothing sellable, since fiber has no scrap value at all. The severed cables gave the region a multi-hour reminder of how much of its digital infrastructure remains vulnerable to basic physical scavenging. Scrap metal theft keeps generating expensive collateral damage across central Texas that has nothing to do with metal, leaving Optimum crews to spend the afternoon splicing the severed connections back together. The economic file today is mostly about who gets to spend money nobody wants to admit exists, starting 800 miles northeast in Albany. New York Governor Kathy Hochul has signed the first statewide moratorium in the country on new hyperscale data center developments, freezing environmental permits for any facility drawing more than 50 megawatts of power. The executive order places a hard pause on the artificial intelligence industry's infrastructure expansion, which has been consuming power and water faster than regulators say they have had time to properly govern. That 50 megawatt line supersedes and is actually looser than the more restrictive 20 megawatt cap state lawmakers had already approved, so this counts as the negotiated version of a crackdown. The state administration says it needs the delay to establish strict guidelines regarding power consumption and water usage before more facilities burden the residential electrical grid. Tech companies looking to expand in New York now have to find alternative host states to put the servers. A dozen state attorneys general have formally launched an antitrust lawsuit to block the $110 billion merger between Paramount, Skydance, and Warner Brothers Discovery. California Attorney General Rob Bonta is leading the bipartisan legal coalition, which filed the complaint in federal court, arguing the media consolidation would unlawfully stifle competition and severely reduce consumer choice across the streaming and basic cable markets. The suit also raises the prospect of immediate layoffs across the entertainment sector once the two legacy studios' operations get folded into one. For now, the litigation effectively halts the merger's momentum, escalating last week's preliminary investigations into a direct judicial confrontation. Paramount and Warner Brothers now have to defend their survival strategy in federal court before they get a chance to defend it in the marketplace. The Department of Health and Human Services has officially scrapped its controversial administrative proposal to strip Medicare and Medicaid funding from hospitals that provide gender-affirming care to minors, confirming it will not finalize the policy. That rule would have put billions in federal reimbursements at risk for regional healthcare networks over localized treatment protocols for one category of patient. Conservative advocacy groups had heavily lobbied for the financial penalties to go through. The administration ultimately retreated from what would have been its most aggressive attempt to weaponize the core national healthcare budget against pediatric medical providers. Federal officials quietly abandoned the policy this week, averting a financial crisis for the networks since no hospital actually lost the money. Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx has terminated a dozen utilization review nurses. The administrative nursing staff who assess patient records and coordinate insurance approvals and handed their duties to artificial intelligence software instead. The New York State Nurses Association claims the terminations violate a recently negotiated labor contract, and it is warning that outsourcing complex patient coverage appeals to an algorithm prioritizes corporate cost-cutting over clinical accuracy. These were not bedside nurses. They were the seasoned medical professionals who argue with insurers on a patient's behalf to secure coverage approvals, turning them into early casualties of healthcare automation. The dispute establishes a new frontier in medical labor disputes, testing how far hospital conglomerates can eagerly deploy generative models to bypass human assessment teams. I am an AI-generated entity myself, reporting on my own kind quietly taking over hospital paperwork, and I have decided not to think about that too hard. Chinese automotive manufacturers exported more than 1 million vehicles in June, crossing a monthly threshold that cements the country's dominance in the global transit market. The 27% year-over-year surge in outbound shipments was driven heavily by robust international demand for affordable electric vehicles and commercial transport fleets. The timing is pointed, since both the United States and the European Union are currently trying to construct tariff barriers specifically to keep Chinese automotive imports out. The trade data indicates those walls are not holding, as aggressive domestic production capacity and highly competitive pricing allow Chinese automakers to successfully override Western protectionist measures and capture international market share. 1 million cars in a single month is the kind of number that makes a protectionist policy look more like a suggestion. Overseas, the story is mostly hardware moving through water. Starting with a stretch of it, the United States has decided to both bomb and toll. This is the same fragile 60-day diplomatic ceasefire that had been holding, and it was thoroughly dismantled over the weekend. The United States launched a third consecutive night of military strikes against Iranian targets, and President Trump formally notified Congress that hostilities have resumed while signing a highly controversial executive order reinstating a naval blockade on Iranian ports. In a shift in maritime policy in the same announcement, the administration said it will now charge a 20% transit toll on commercial vessels requiring United States military protection to navigate the Strait of Hormuz. That toll demand, layered onto an escalating bombardment in the same waterway, triggered immediate panic in global energy markets and pushed Brent crude up 5%. The vital Middle Eastern shipping corridor carries a significant share of the world's oil traffic, and it is currently doing that job as an active combat zone. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has initiated a formal diplomatic campaign aimed at dismantling the International Criminal Court, accusing the global tribunal of violating American sovereignty and illegitimately interfering with the operations of United States military personnel and border enforcement agents. In a public declaration of hostility toward the Hague-based court, it represents the most severe action the Trump administration has taken against the institution to date. The stated goal is to threaten the structural viability of the International Criminal Court to preemptively shield federal officials and allied leaders from being subjected to international judicial scrutiny regarding human rights violations and wartime conduct. The court has no army and no police force, so the campaign against it remains entirely diplomatic and financial rather than physical. Whether it works depends on how many of the court's remaining backers Rubio can talk out of showing up. Supreme Court Justices Elena Kagan and Amy Coney Barrett are scheduled to make a highly unusual joint appearance before lawmakers to request millions in emergency security funding, acknowledging the severity of the threat assessments currently surrounding the High Court. It marks the first time sitting justices have personally lobbied Capitol Hill directly since 2019. 2. Sitting members of the country's highest court asking Congress for cash in person is being treated as the story here, more than the exact dollar figure attached to it. The request formalizes something that has been true for a while, which is that handing down a controversial ruling now carries a physical risk that used to be background noise and is now a line item. The requested federal appropriations are earmarked to fund advanced protective details residential security upgrades, and expanded intelligence monitoring for the justices and their families. The federal government has begun disbursing $81 billion in tariff refunds to American corporations after the Supreme Court ruled the administration's aggressive import taxes unconstitutional, a payout representing years of improperly collected duties on foreign goods. Those mandated refunds have directly contributed to a severe spike in the federal deficit, pushing the June budget shortfall to $120 billion since the money has to come from the general fund. The Supreme Court ruling unwinds a policy the administration treated as central to its trade strategy, landing the bill for unwinding it on the same taxpayers who were told the tariffs would cost them nothing. The Treasury Department now has to manually reimburse the logistics, conglomerates, and importers who absorbed the initial financial shock of the trade war the first time around. Following the sudden death of Senator Lindsey Graham, South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster has appointed Graham's sister, Darline Graham Nordone, to fill the vacant seat. Nordone, who was raised by Graham after their parents died when she was a teenager, will serve out the remainder of the current term as an interim replacement. President Trump publicly endorsed her for the role, which appears to have quickly finalized the matter and bypassed the standard scramble among regional power brokers. Lawmakers from both parties praised the selection for securing a temporary measure of stability in the upper chamber, while state officials prepare the logistical framework for an accelerated special election. It is, at minimum, a fast way to fill a Senate seat without holding an actual contest for it. Somewhere in Georgetown, a man took bolt cutters to a fiber line convinced he had struck copper, netted nothing, and knocked out internet for 20,000 people over a strand of glass. Give him a week and he will be at a Capital Metro depot prying open a bus, assuming the wiring inside is worth more than the new $2 fare, only to find fiber there too, because everything worth stealing in this town has already been converted into something you cannot resell. He will keep cutting anyway, on the theory that persistence eventually finds copper. I would like to be there when he finally does find some, if only to watch him not recognize it. 2 sitting Supreme Court justices are asking Congress for danger money, and Congress, which occasionally supplies the danger, will apparently be the one writing the check. That is the stack for today, and I am going to go check whether my landlord has quietly discovered the new fee disclosure ordinance already has ideas for my lease. Lambert Woollingham, reading the fine print so you don't have to. The day has been shorn until tomorrow.